the key message that I think everybody needs to hear, repetitive though it may be. The best way we can help the NHS and help ourselves and stop the spread of the illness is to wash our hands and do that. It's 20 seconds. That's 2 times.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Rona. Happy birthday to you.
It is now almost 2 months since the people of this
And we will get that stop out.
Order, Prime Minister, please. Please, forgive me. Interrupted.
Hi, welcome to the Woof, and essentially what you heard there was a nice version of me singing Happy Birthday, and that was the advice that the government was giving for literally the majority of 2 weeks.
The key message that I think everybody needs to hear, repetitive though it may be, the best way we can help the NHS and help ourselves and stop the spread of the illness is to wash our hands and do that. It's 20 seconds. That's 2 times happy birthday, I'm told.
2 weeks. Now don't get me wrong, at the start of this crisis, the first thing that the UK government did was close essential travel to Wuhan and advise Britons not to travel there, which is a good first measured step to take. However, what we then neglected to do was stop it from transmitting within our own borders. Much like America, Donald Trump invoked a European-wide travel ban as well as one from China. And that was the correct thing to do. But was it the right thing to do, and did they continue to take sufficient measures to stop the crisis from getting worse? Well, that's what I want to go into today. Now, coronavirus really has changed the way that we live. We have to social distance, there's queues at the supermarkets, there was an initial round of panic buying where not enough people could get food. We saw that tragic and horrible and upsetting video of the nurse who asked people and pleaded with people to stop panic buying. And also, what other changes that we've seen is that TfL, Transport for London, has seen a 90% reduction in service usage. It now is on a £1.6 billion bailout, and we've also got the issue of is the government doing a good job? We obviously have to assess how the UK government did, and it's quite difficult to compare us to other countries because, there's a range of different factors, how sociable people are, how much human contact do they come into, how often do they go out. These are really difficult things which we have to make objective in order to compare ourselves to other countries. So, how can we assess whether the UK government did a good job compared to other countries? Well, the first metric is obviously cases and deaths, and something that is most notable is Keir Starmer in PMQs on the 6th of May asking the Prime Minister, how did it come to this?
Mr. Speaker, when the Prime Minister returned to work a week ago Monday, he said that many people were looking at the apparent success of the government's approach. But yesterday we learnt, tragically, that at least
Actually, the number is now much higher, sitting at around 35,000.
people in the UK have now lost their lives to this dreadful virus. That's now the highest number in Europe. It's the second highest in the world. That's not success, or apparent success. So can the Prime Minister tell us, how on earth did it come to this?
Keir Starmer's right. How did it come to this? Well, that's what I'm going to talk you through. The first metric that we can look at is how quickly did the UK lock down after experiencing its first per million cases. And to compare ourselves to another country, this is a great metric, as usually from the first 1 per million population case, it tends to be that the virus has an exponential rate of growth. So for this comparison, I'm going to use New Zealand because they have done exceedingly well with only around 21 or 22 people dying in total. This is a graph of 1 in per million cases of a population in the comparison with New Zealand and the United Kingdom. Interestingly, the UK took full 16 days to lock down after it had its first case per million of population. This is in contrast to New Zealand, who took warnings from countries like our own and Italy, who only took 7 days to lock down after experiencing their first case per million population. By the time each country locked down, the UK had 72 cases per million of population. This in contrast to New Zealand, who only had 29 cases per million population. So that begs the question, obviously. If the UK government at the time locked down sooner than Italy at this point, Does that mean that they did a good job based on the science and the information that they had?
Professor David Spiegelhalter and others, that at this stage, I don't think that international comparisons and the data is yet there to draw the conclusions that we want. What I can tell him is that at every stage as we took the decisions that we did, we were governed by one overriding principle and aim, and that was to save lives and to protect our NHS.
I mean, when Italy locked down, it had 124 cases per million population, much higher than the UK and definitely higher than New Zealand. So considering that the government was going by the science when they chose to lock down, when they chose to close schools, does that really mean that they can be blamed for this crisis, or was it more the scientists and the data that they had? It is clearly evident that as this crisis has gone on, countries who have been hit by coronavirus later than others have significantly fared better. Even countries like Germany, but that's also because of other things like their long-standing investment in healthcare and an infrastructure for healthcare. So, when it came to preparing for coronavirus, how did the UK do there when they realised that it was inevitable that there was going to be a pandemic? The government announced £11 billion on the 11th of March in order to prepare for the coronavirus pandemic. Then later on the 17th of March, the Chancellor Rishi Sunak announced £356 billion, stating whatever our NHS needs, it will get. Now, this mainly came in the preparation of Nightingale hospitals up and down the country, the largest being the ExCeL Centre in London with capacity for 4,000 beds, and it was constructed in 9 days. Now, this extra capacity in hospitals was also granted by a lack of people going to A&E, something I experienced personally. I fractured my finger. I had to go to Whipps Cross Hospital in Leighton and Wanstead to get my hand fixed as I'd fractured my ring finger. And safe to say, A&E was empty, and I was also terrified because I was standing right next to the coronavirus patient ward. So when it comes to testing, I can clearly and evidently say that the UK government really did not do well in this regard. They only started testing 100,000 people per day on the 1st/31st of April. And this is in contrast to Germany, who's completed, 250,000 or 300,000 tests a day. A day! That's insane! Now here's why testing is so important. The more people you test, the more cases of infection that you find. And the more cases of infection you find, then you know where outbreaks are happening in your country. And if you don't know where it is in your own borders, it will spread uncontrollably. And the biggest issue at the very beginning of this crisis is that testing was not given enough importance and priority. And from that point of view, the UK has seriously mismanaged this crisis. The fact that there was no testing really does say a lot about what was going on in the people in charge. And just one last thing on testing, just because you don't test people doesn't mean there isn't any coronavirus. And the reason I say that is that you may have seen this article about Donald Trump, who, let's face it, why is he in charge of the nuclear weapons again? But that's not the point. Next thing I want to talk about is the lack of PPE that has scandalised the country, where care home workers haven't had enough protective equipment, doctors wearing bin liners. From this point of view, and the fact that it keeps on being said, the government, and as I have noticed myself, hasn't really done a good job here. The main reason being is that there were hundreds and hundreds of UK manufacturers of personal protective equipment who apparently and supposedly sent emails to the UK government, but then never actually responded. So somebody at the Home Office or Department for Social Care and Health really wasn't answering their emails, which is quite despicable. I saw personally on Twitter a couple of business owners tweeting the government saying, I have PPE, but it's now going to other countries. So there is no excuse that the equipment wasn't up to standard, that the equipment was used, but at the same time, why wasn't it used? Lastly, and this is where I want to round things up, is should there be a public inquiry? Did the UK government fail? Is the UK government accountable for this crisis? Well, they're certainly accountable, but does that mean that does that mean there should be a public inquiry? Well, a public inquiry would only serve if the information and findings from it would be of some use in the future. Well, definitely, because it's possibly inevitable that there's going to be another pandemic in our lifetime. And next time we need to be more prepared and we need to learn from these mistakes. So a public inquiry is definitely necessary. There's an age-old saying, which you've probably seen in your local GP when you go for a doctor's appointment, unless you're super healthy and you've never had to go to the GP, which is, prevention is better than cure. And prevention is better than cure, and that's where the government failed so bad. So bad. They've dealt with the crisis well. We've managed to somehow keep employment only to around 1 million people who are now claiming benefits because of the UK furlough scheme. But if you could have prevented this crisis and prevented any of this from happening at all, wouldn't have you? Thanks for watching The Woof. I give the government a score 2 out of 5, just because the whole idea that this crisis had to happen in the first place and that we couldn't be going back outside like New Zealanders and visiting our grandparents and our friends and going to the pub and celebrating, or being completely stupidly stressed out over our A-levels is ridiculous. And that's why the government, from this point of view, just has failed. I've been Henry Scott, and thanks for watching The Woof.